Morning, everyone. I'm Ania Wieckowski. I'm an editor at HBR. And I'm going to have us start with something a little bit unconventional. But if you're like me, you've been sitting in this room for more hours than one and possibly two. So could everybody please stand up? This means you. Stand up. Thank you, panelists. Stretch. Hands over your head. Lean to the right. Lean to your other right. Wake up your left arm. Wake up your right arm. Shake your right leg. Shake your left leg. Feet on the floor. You feel the floor. Deep breath in through your nose. Deep breath out through your mouth. OK. Are we all feeling calmer, more centered? Thank you. All right. You may now have a seat. I am very excited about the panel we have for you here today. We've been hearing for the past few days, and indeed the whole week, about ecosystems, strategies, benefits, opportunities. And here we have an opportunity to dive into two case studies. We have with us two leaders who have brought together diverse groups of people to great benefit for their industries and their organizations. One is a global brand, a large multinational that has restructured to better serve its customers in the world of the Internet of Things. And we have a government and a looser coalition of government and business that's looking to bring talent to an exciting city. Their stories are very different, but I think we're going to be able to find some common themes, as well as seeing kind of the wide range of ecosystems and ecosystem structures that are possible. A few words on format. We're going to have each of our presenters speak for about 15 minutes, including a short video about their ecosystems. And then we'll have two commentators share their thoughts about those ecosystems. And then we will open up the floor to a Q&A. I'll ask a few questions to start. And then we'll open it up to you all, as we've been doing throughout the conference, to add your own questions. And we should have a conversation of about 20, 25 minutes. Just a note, I think you may all know this, but we will be conducting some of the panel in Chinese. And everybody should have access to a headset. And if you set it to channel 1, you'll be able to have the simultaneous translation into English. And with that, I'd like to say a few more words about our two presenters. I'd start with Louise Juhl, who comes to us from Denmark, where she works with Copenhagen Capacity, which is the official government-funded organization that promotes business development and investment in the region. And in 2017, in Copenhagen, the video game industry was booming, and it was booming to such a degree that video game studios were beginning to poach coders from each other. And the city saw this as an opportunity to think about how to attract talent to the city and to the region for video game coding, but technology more broadly. And so as Louise started researching this problem, she stumbled upon something called eSports. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of eSports? Lots of people, OK. So eSports is basically observing the industry that has evolved around observing other people play video games. So I watch sports on television, or I might go to my favorite team's sporting event in person. And people are doing the same thing now with video games. And she saw this as a great opportunity to attract talent if they were able to build up the esports capacity in Copenhagen. So we'll hear more about that and how she was able to do that and the successes it brought to their original plan to develop talent in Copenhagen and its surrounding area. We also have with us Mr. Yong, who is the vice president of Hire's Smart Home Eco Platform and the general manager of kitchen appliances for the company. Hire is one of the world's leading home appliance companies, and they really led the way in building appliances equipped for the Internet of Things. Today, we'll hear about an ecosystem that Hire built specifically around the Internet of Food. They've partnered their organization with other actors in their ecosystem, including organic food growers, a wine label, people who write recipes, and they've brought them all together and restructured Hire itself in order to better serve their customers. We also have with us 2 panelists. Mr. Simone Cicero is a designer and facilitator and creator of the Platform Design Toolkit, an open source methodology for organizations looking to build or participate in ecosystems. And finally, Dr. Bill Fischer is a professor at IMD. He co-founded and co-directs the school's program on driving strategic innovation in cooperation with MIT Sloan. And we also owe him a debt of gratitude for initiating and organizing this panel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Louise.
Thank you. Thank you, Ania, and thank you for the introduction. And it's very nice to see all of you. I am Louise, and today I will tell you a little bit about how we in Copenhagen Capacity found a new ecosystem within eSport and gaming. That was when we were trying to attract talents within IT and tech. I have included a video, so for those of you who don't know what eSport is all about, hopefully you will have a feeling and then you can feel the atmosphere from the tournaments. And also, perhaps you will then see how we have used the different channels within the eSport world. We used the eSport superstars, we used the arena, and we used all the streaming in order to get the IT people into the gaming development.
Gaming and eSport is a booming industry globally. In Copenhagen, we saw a rapidly emerging eSports and gaming environment, but also an increasing demand for IT, tech and gaming talent to enable the industry to grow. We found that Copenhagen had the eSport teams, the gaming and eSport companies, investors, gamers, fans and gaming clubs, but only little political support and awareness. We gathered important political stakeholders such as the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen and the Minister of Trade and Industry, and they quickly realized that Denmark had potential to become a vibrant hub for gaming and eSport companies and talent. With this eye-opener, things gathered pace. Denmark set out to draft its first national eSports strategy, and with the funding from Danish ministries and municipalities, we launched a creative campaign together with the owners of the Counter-Strike event Blast Pro. This was a completely new way to attract tech talent to Greater Copenhagen. The campaign helped generate applications for open job positions, which has led to the employment that will contribute with millions of euros to Denmark's public finances in the years to come. This is the story of how we discovered an emerging yet latent ecosystem, which just needed political support and awareness to develop into a vibrant gaming and eSport hub, with potential to brand Copenhagen as the place to be for international tech talent and companies.
So what really happened was that we in marketing at Copenhagen Capacity were asked to come up with a campaign in order to attract these talents. It had to be within IT and it had to be specifically within the gaming industry. All the local companies, they were screaming for help. They needed talents, they needed candidates in order to fulfill all the tasks, in order to develop these well-known games and in order to grow the company. So really what we had to do is we had to look in and do some research. We found that we had an amazing environment. We had a gaming environment with a lot of different companies that were doing quite good. And then they had a passion and a drive that we didn't know anything about. So it's an eye-opener. We didn't know that we actually had gaming development companies developing video games that was known all over the world. We had games like Hitman, Candy Crush, Subway Surfers, and games like Avatar, Movie Star Planet, and Assassin's Creed, and many, many more. I didn't know anything about eSport. I didn't know anything about gaming. I thought it was just children playing computer games at home. What else we learned was the fact that we had a Danish company based in Copenhagen called Unity Technology. Not many people know about Unity Technology, but it is one of the biggest gaming platforms. It is the gaming engine behind a lot of the well-known games that we saw before. But it's also an engine that's used in 80% of all the gaming apps that you download from App Store. Over 80% are using this engine. So it's huge. When we were talking to all these people, we were talking to the IT developers and the gaming companies, and we were talking to the startups and everything. They were saying there's an eSports scene in Denmark. And why? They were asking outside, why do you have so many eSports stars coming from such a little country as Denmark? We didn't know. But what we found out was that we had actually world champions within the video game called FIFA, another game called Dota, another game called League of Legends, but also especially within the Counter-Strike, also called CSGO. These stars are just as big as the football names that we know, such as Messi and Ronaldo. But they're huge, and we didn't know anything about it. But what we found out was that in Counter-Strike, we actually had an all-Danish national team, and they have won the championships 4 times in a row. They were huge, and they had a huge fan scar. It was amazing. At the same time, in 2017, we also found out that there was a company just starting up called Blast Pro. Blast Pro are the ones who are organizing the tournaments that you just saw in the video. Those big tournaments where actually 15,000 people are looking at these people playing computer games. Whoa, I didn't know what that was all about when I started this. It was completely new to me. But they were doing really good, and what was more important is 15,000 people watching it. It's not much, but they broadcast it on national TV. But the most important thing being they actually stream this on a channel called Twitch, and over 5 million people are watching these tournaments. So they're huge, and we didn't know about these channels, and those were the channels that we would like to use in order to reach out to the talents within IT and tech. So all this coming together, there was actually an ecosystem already there. We had the entertainment providers in the middle. Those were the Blast Pro channels, the ones reaching out to all the audience, the international audience. But it was also the gamers, and it was also the platform, it was also the fans and everything around it. So there was already an ecosystem. But what they needed was political focus, and they needed funding. So they were screaming for help. So the turning point, I think, was really when we realized this potential. The potential that this could do more than just being children playing computer games at home. So we called in important stakeholders. I called in the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, trying to explain them what this was all about, given the big factors that eSport and video gaming are actually now exceeding music and movie businesses. It's huge, and you have to talk about these facts because we didn't know anything about them. We were also telling them that the Blast Pro tournament that we saw in Copenhagen, that was broadcasted on Danish national TV. And more people were actually watching this than people watching the Olympics on the same channel just a few years previously. So it was huge. So what we did was, when we got the political focus, then we started to run extensive international campaigns, telling the world that we have something to offer here, we have something within e-sport and gaming. Please come and join us as talents in order to grow and make. And then by doing that, we actually attracted a lot of talents within IT and tech, and within IT developers within the gaming industry, very specifically. And by doing that, we brought new blood into the local companies who were screaming for help, and make them able to stay in Copenhagen. Because if they didn't get the talents, they were looking elsewhere. They were looking to move out of Copenhagen, out of Denmark, in order to get these talents, and that certainly would be a catastrophe for Denmark and Danish economy. Another thing I would like to stress that's quite important, actually very important, is finding the right decision makers, the people who have a drive and passion and who are actually taking action, not just talking, but doing things. And by talking to the Minister of Trade and Industry, and him also coupling up with the Ministry of Culture, they came out with the old national eSports strategy this year in 2019. So that's something that really pushes and helps the ecosystem. I brought another example. That's within fintech. Fintech being financial technology. Really what happened when we stumbled upon this was very much the same as I just explained with esport and gaming. To start with, it's a gut feeling. People, when we talk to the startup environment and we talk to the companies and we talk to the stakeholders, suddenly they're talking about fintech. We've heard about it, fintech, we didn't know what it was. And being an investment and promotion agency for the greater Copenhagen area, we need these focus areas. We need these strongholds and value propositions in order to attract business and talent and investment. So it's quite interesting. We did more or less the same thing as I just told you about what we did for esport and gaming. We gathered the right stakeholders. Again, it was the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And we told them about it, making them understand what it's all about. Also, it was important to find who are in this community within fintech. In this case, it was Copenhagen Fintech Association. Back then, they were very small. It was a small organization, but the members, meaning the companies, they were already screaming for help for specific talents within fintech. And that's a key, that's a point I would like to stress today. Be aware when the companies are starting to ask for talents within a specific emerging area, then perhaps that could become an ecosystem. So really by doing all that and then also running the extensive international campaign, then we were attracting new blood again into the industry. And again, people became aware of the greater Copenhagen having something within fintech to offer. So please come and join us and help us lift this to become a fintech hub. By doing all that, having an emerging tech area coming so fast, you have to be agile. And you have to make sure that the products are unique and they are requested international. That's what at least happened in this case. So I believe that we at least somehow helped fintech become an ecosystem. For within the campaigns, attracting talents, but also companies now into the fintech area. We got over 42 million euros that's contributed to the GDP. But more importantly, the Copenhagen Fintech Association has become much bigger. It's got a lot of companies now joining the association, and it had political focus and political funding. Also, what you could see when we started, there was no one in the fintech lab, and now there's over 150 cutting-edge entrepreneurs sitting there, and they're looking to expand. But most importantly is the fact that 3 years ago, we were not ranked anywhere on any list for being a fintech hub in Europe, and now we are within number 10. I brought this slide. I am certainly no eco-building expert, but what I have seen is that when you're working with heavy established ecosystem compared to the emerging fast tech ecosystems, there's a big difference. Life science, I think, is very different in a way. Life science being the biggest ecosystem in Greater Copenhagen, just to stress that. There's a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of decision makers, and they're not very agile, and they're certainly not open for new things. And I think that's a big difference from having these new emerging ecosystem or potential ecosystem coming up, you have to be open and agile. I have no strategy when working with these things. Really, what I think that all you guys out there, and in my market as well, there are loads of different small emerging tech or potential ecosystems at least, because we just don't understand them. To start with, we didn't understand eSport, we didn't understand fintech. So it's really important to make sure that you understand all these new things popping up, and then finding out how to work with them and support them in growing perhaps into an ecosystem. If you don't hear them and you don't have anyone screaming up and asking for help, then they might die. So in conclusion, many people have asked me, so what is your strategy? As I just mentioned before, I don't have a strategy. You have to be open and agile and go with the flow. Really what is important is to make sure that you bring in the right decision makers and stakeholders and make them understand what this focus area is all about. You have to bring political focus and economic funding. And then what we learned at least was that it's really important also to run these international campaigns, making the international audience know what you have to offer, but at the same time very much important for attracting talents and new blood, and especially very much and a lot and enough new blood into the industry to make it become an ecosystem. That was all for me right now. If you have questions afterwards, I will answer in the panel.
I have one question. As you're sitting down, just maybe briefly, could you talk about your role as you see it in this ecosystem? Because it feels like you are at the center pulling a lot of these strings, but we've talked about ways in which you don't feel like you're the core holding this whole thing together.
No, yeah. Many people are saying, so how do you find these stakeholders? Who are the right ones? And honestly, I found it very easy finding the right stakeholders because the ecosystem was already there. I didn't do much. Really what I had to do was bring people together. We had an area within, as you could see, the gaming development, and then we had the platform, and then we had the eSport and the eSport stars, and even the entertainment part. And bringing all these people together and talking to each other and helping each other and using each other's channels, that really was the easy part, because it was just talking to each other. But I remember when we first brought in the companies who wanted to join in for the digital campaigning, they were looking like this because they were actually competitors. You know, they were kind of stealing each other's candidates and talents because there wasn't enough blood. So they were not very open. But when they found out that they actually, by doing this, we would bring new blood into the whole industry, and then they opened up.
That seems like the hardest part, and you make it easy.
Yes, and then making the politicians understand this new area, that is not just for fun. It's not just children doing it. This is big business. That was another part that can be quite hard, because eSport is quite hard to understand if you don't know anything about it.
Thank you. Let's move on to Mr. Wu.
Sorry.
I'm delighted to participate in this forum today. Yesterday and today, I've learned so much about ecosystems. I'm very happy to have this opportunity. Yesterday at the forum, our CEO, Mr. Zhang, also talked about how Haier is using the 人单合一 model, the micro-enterprises model, and the ecosystem micro-community to transform the company from a white goods manufacturer into a lively and energetic ecosystem. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I've been doing with building smart kitchen ecosystem and the Internet of Food ecosystem, and I hope to seek your advice and suggestions as well. As we know that Haier is focused on building a smart home, so it's very closely related to our day-to-day needs as consumers, such as foods, housing, and mobility. So I'm going to talk about food today in particular. It's a solution about the food, and it's an internet of food. And there are a few core points that I want to share with you. From products to scenarios is the first thing I want to talk about. In a smart kitchen, what do we need? We really don't need standalone, isolated products, but we need a whole set of solutions combining everything in the scenario. When we talk about manufacturing a white good, we would think about a refrigerator, a wine cooler, or a stove, or an oven. But do we really need those pieces of different appliances? What we really need is a solution for a better diet and better food and healthier food. In the past, the refrigeration industry is totally separate from the food industry. There is this complete disconnection. We only talk about how to preserve freshness when we are thinking about building a new refrigerator product, but consumers are thinking differently. For example, salmon and strawberries are very difficult to preserve. This is something that every consumer knows. But as a refrigerator producer, how do we provide a good solution so that they can better preserve the freshness of different food ingredients? And how do we collaborate with agriculture businesses to provide better solutions? And that's why we need to build an ecosystem to connect the consumer with different product and service producers so that they can get better strawberries and salmon, and I can also better preserve them in the fridge. And similarly, we also have a case with an oven where we can help consumers better cook their food. So it's no longer just about a single product, but a whole set of solutions. The second thing I'd like to share with you is ecosystem. I believe that ultimately, ecosystems are going to embrace different industries. Previously, different industries are quite separate. White goods, food, clothing, etc. But in today's world, our consumers don't really look at different industries. They want a whole set of solutions, and that would require an ecosystem to connect everything. Previously, we actually also did have ecosystems. We have an ecosystem of suppliers and sales channel providers. But today, when we talk about ecosystem, it's really not a company-centered ecosystem, but instead a consumer and user-oriented ecosystem. And that means there's overlap between a home appliance maker and a food producer and a recipe producer and even logistics providers. And this is an ecosystem ultimately aimed at providing one-stop shop solutions for consumers. So in a smart kitchen, you have an IoT-enabled networked appliances acting as a carrier or vehicle connecting the consumer with the providers. So as I said, two important points. Scenarios are going to replace products, and ecosystems are going to embrace different industries. At Haier, which used to be a traditional home appliance maker, how do we achieve this transformation into an ecosystem to provide one-stop shop solutions for the users that we serve? I think there are two critical points. Number one, our 人单合一 model. And number two, a co-creation and sharing mechanism. If we look at the slide, I can talk about two things here. The 人单合一 model addresses the problem of hierarchy and bureaucracy in traditional companies, where there is this great disconnection between different business units and departments so that they can't really be very responsive to the changing needs of users and consumers. In many companies, this is a big problem. When they launch a new product, it doesn't really sell well. And then they start lowering their prices, giving discounts, and they don't have any profit. So it's all about the beginning of this process where they didn't really understand the user's needs. And that's why we at Haier have divided up our company into thousands of micro enterprises so that we can be more responsive and accountable to the user. It's because we are closest to the user. On the horizontal axis, you can see this is our solution-oriented ecosystem micro-communities that focused on providing solutions, and the y-axis, these are experience EMCs focusing on understanding the experience needs of the users. These two EMCs come together. So I think there's a big question mark on how we can really create value and also deliver value and share value in the ecosystem. In a traditional company, we all wanted to sell products at a good price, but when we worked with a distributor, they wanted to sell a product at a lower price so they can sell more. So there's this game between the producer and the distributor, and not everyone wins. This is exactly because of the disconnect between creation of value and delivery and sharing of value. Therefore, we want to ensure that while we produce and provide best-in-class experience for the users, we also ensure that everyone in this collaboration, in this ecosystem, can share the value created. This is a continuously iterating system because user needs are iterating, and we need more providers and suppliers to be responsive to these changing needs. And that means we need an open ecosystem. As Mr. Zhang said yesterday, we want to build a rainforest with perpetual life rather than a walled garden. The capabilities you can provide when you join the ecosystem are the most important factor. But if you can't really bring in anything new, you'll probably not be a sustainable business in the ecosystem. It's a dynamic equilibrium. So we are leading an effort to develop international standards for the refrigeration industry. We are working with IEEE and IEC. We've also been a pioneer in developing relevant industry standards in China. We have about 500 ecosystem partners today working with us, and we've been making great progress. But we also know that this is an exploratory process filled with challenges and difficulties, and that's exactly what we are working on. That's what we'd like to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Feeding ourselves is a universal question facing every household and every individual. What to eat, how to make it, and how to do better and healthier are the problems that Haier IOF has to solve. After turning electronic appliances into networked appliances, IOF cooperates with external resources and meets the needs to meet users' demands with Ecosystem Scenario, providing users with one-stop solution. At the moment, Haier plays a leading role in drafting the IEEE international standards for IOF to realize universal application. So how will IOF change our lives? The IOF platform can intelligently recommend healthy recipes suitable for the body, according to health data of everyone in the family. It can also get personalized dietary structure through gene phenotype data to make the dietary plan more accurate.
Please find the receipt for black pepper steak.
In fact, the black pepper steak that was just put into the oven is a semi-finished product purchased directly from the IOF mall. Even more, pizza crust, egg tarts, lamb chops, and some sauces customized by professional chefs all can be ordered here. These foods are not only easy to cook, but can also be traced back to every step of their growth, production, and transportation through the smart platform. Effective supervision gives you generally safe and healthy food to serve on your dining table.
What other nutrition do I need to take in?
Start the dishwasher, please.
IOF ecosystem not only enables users to eat more and more healthily, but also affects the industry and resource providers. At present, it has cooperated with 307 ecosystem resource providers with 428 products. It integrates the service capabilities of resource providers, providing one-stop solutions for user and iterating according to users' demands. The recognition of users and repurchases makes a win-win situation for IOF and resource providers.
海尔食联网向我们开放了他们的平台，让我们这些安心食材供应商可以为广大的海尔用户提供服务。
Thank you. Mr. Wu, I wonder before we go on to our panelists, if you could quickly talk about the ecosystem micro-communities at Haier and how they come together. We've talked a little bit about the micro-enterprises, but how do they come together in these communities to address some of these problems?
小微实际上是
Micro enterprises are an important organizational setup for Haier to achieve its transformation from a bureaucratic company into an ecosystem. Haier was first divided up into a few thousand micro-enterprises, and then these micro-enterprises come together to form ecosystem micro-communities. It's a very different organization where a leader tells everyone to do certain things. It becomes an autonomous setup where everyone is focused on the user, and actually everyone is also paid by the user. Rather than their salaries and compensations are no longer set up by their supervisor, but determined by the value that they can create for the user, and whether they are recognized by the user for their work and performance. And in that sense, everyone becomes their own CEO.
Let's move on to our two panelists who will just share some thoughts and perhaps frameworks for us to think about what we've just heard. Simone?
Thank you. It was great to watch these two presentations. We just prepared a few, let's say, considerations that are worth sharing. And first of all, I believe we use these tools, which are open source tools that you mentioned in the start, and especially the ecosystem canvas, to try to highlight, let's say, the differences and the convergences between these two projects. And especially when I was talking with Louise a few minutes ago, I think the highlight for me was that it was difficult for Louise to understand who was in the center. And especially because Copenhagen capacity has been doing this kind of weaving and sustaining work, and mostly providing and producing this political, or I would say administrative support and financial support, for example, through partners, as I understand. And and in the case of the higher ecosystem, it was nice because when we shared the canvas with our colleagues, our friends higher, they felt like they had to restructure a little bit the canvas. And as you can see, I don't know if this works here with it doesn't, but if you look at the labels, in the lower part of the canvas, you see that they have been changed. And what we can spot, interestingly, I would say that the user is in the center. So somehow, you see in this restructuring of the canvas, you see emerging very thoroughly the culture of the company, that is the user centricity. And also you see how the scenarios that, for example, the scenario that you described are now basically enablers of collaboration. And I can tell you that we have been, and with Bill, we have been doing lots of interviews, and I think that the presentation that Mr. Wu did, it didn't disclose the profound collaborative mindset that the company has in trying to really weave the ecosystems and make it possible for many of the companies and the micro-enterprises, not just inside but also outside the company, to really find ways to collaborate. And especially interesting, I believe, is the technology that Hire is developing through the blockchain and the smart contract platform that is making really easy for companies to contractualize, to commit to shared objectives for the success and of the whole team. And okay, so if we can spot, I believe, a couple of very interesting things that are going to be the basis also for the questions that you want to share, is that, first of all, what we see is an evolution. I would say in both these projects, we see an evolution of thinking about platforms and ecosystems as ways to conquer markets and to achieve economies of scope and scale, which is more like the GAFA perspective, let's say, that we are more used to, into this idea of complex ecosystem that need to be created so that an industry or a local ecosystem, like in the case of Copenhagen capacity, can really evolve and emerge, let's say. So it's like this strong shift towards emergence and evolution. And also what we see is that, again, organizations are moving beyond the idea of dominance and dominating systems into actualizing whole systems. And I would say that this is really, really strong in higher experience, and of course is basic in Copenhagen capacity experience, because there's no intent of dominating, of course, because it's an institutional ecosystem. Again, we spoke about the technology and also how much these new technologies are making, are somehow interconnected now with the organizational model. So these technologies are making possible new organizational models. So, for example, the experience that Hire had with the smart contract platforms. Yeah, in general, and that's more or less everything that I wanted to say. But in general, what we are seeing, I believe, is we are moving from this idea of shaping markets into weaving ecosystems. So we spoke yesterday with the other panelists, and we talked about a paper that was written by Joy Ito and I always forgot the co-author, Kevin Slavin, that you can look up. It's called Designers Participation. And it's very interesting in nailing down how really now with these new tools, we have the opportunities for organizations to design themselves as participants in the systems, not as, governors of the systems. And yeah, I wanted to quote Nora just to close. Nora Bateson, that you may know, she's a daughter of Gregory Bateson. And I think it's really interesting to look from where we are now and look into the future. And the future is going to bring radically new challenges. So the question is, I see emerging from what we are seeing here a strong vision that collaborative systems are essential learning tools for our societies to cope with the challenges that we are going to see in food, for example, or even job markets and so on. So that's more or less what I think was interesting to stress. Thanks for the time.
That's great. Bill?
Yeah, so first of all, what a joy it is to be up here, because we've been working on this panel for a year, maybe. It seems like for a year. And the idea was to try to give you two insights into real systems rather than abstract concepts. And we thought the range between Copenhagen and Hire was sufficient to capture the amount of variety that one can see in ecosystems. So I just have a few observations. First is, these ecosystems were always there. They were, in both cases, they were hiding in plain view. They were operating, but not operating, but they were probably operating haphazardly. And they both needed a catalytic effect, a different catalytic effect in each case, to sort of make them into a more fully functioning community. So the identification, the awareness that the ecosystems are present, I think, is something that we need to think about. How do we do that? It reminds me of Rita McGrath's work on looking around corners. The second thing is in both cases you see economies or organizations going into the unknown and not being able to forecast because they've never done this before. We've never built a smart home before, so who knows how it's going to work. And so what they've done is essentially legitimized betting on the future, but by allowing the ecosystem to have chance collisions that might lead to something that will resonate with the marketplace. Simone and I have talked about, they've put Darwin into the strategist seat, which means, of course, that the strategists are no longer in that seat, and there's a little bit of resistance in terms of how you make this work. But I think that what we see in both cases is that non-directed systems are much more powerful in their potentiality than systems that are directed on the basis of past experience with no familiarity with the future. The third thing that I wanted to say, and essentially an ecosystem is a network of networks. So it's really hard to direct the articulation of those pieces But the people close to the action can do that if they're nimble and agile, as Louise mentioned. I think if you're going to take advantage of the almost unlimited potential that the ecosystems offer, you need to rethink organizational architecture. And I think that what Hire has done in this regard is really instructive. But you need to, you have the opportunity to make spontaneity a competitive differentiator. And, but only if your organization is nimble. So the whole idea of the microenterprises, I think, is to have small groups that are fast enough to be able to adjust quickly, to improvise as they go along in terms of building new relationships and new connections. And then you need platforms to be able to mediate between the sort of Brownian motion that's taking place in the ecosystem and the more regulated world inside a large organization. So the organization, it's not enough to be a partner in an ecosystem. You have to sort of withdraw from wanting to control it, and you have to build an organization that's nimble enough to be able to do this. And then I think the last two brief observations is that for a long time we've spoken about in innovation the difference between creating value and capturing value. But if you're going to build a healthy ecosystem where all of the participants flourish, you have to think also about distributing value. And this is what both Simone and Mr. Wu were talking about. It's the distribution that makes the ecosystem, the distribution of the value created, that makes the ecosystem thrive. But it also threatens brand values because it then begins to spread. The experience becomes more important than any one of the brand holders. Last observation is, in a world where we're told that software rules supreme, it's hardware producers that are extremely important in becoming the portals for a lot of the data that runs the smart ecosystem.
I'm interested in how formal these ecosystems are, how formally arranged, what is the, how formally defined the relationships between the players are. I wonder if you could each speak to that a little bit in your own ecosystem. To what degree is there any kind of contracting between the partners, or what does the relationship actually consist of? Maybe Louise, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, for me, it wasn't very formal at all. It really, as I said in the presentation as well, I had to go with the flow because I didn't know what's going to happen, and I didn't know who I was going to meet next time and how important they would be in an ecosystem. So not very formal at all.
You were able to sort of be incredibly agile as a result.
Yes, and really just binding people together, that was the most important thing in my case.
Mr. Wu?
In the higher ecosystem, EMCs are semi-formal. They are created as a community of micro-enterprises, and they freely organize together. They're self-organized because different micro-enterprises work in different industries to together fulfill the user needs. And so EMCs are also a dynamic setup. They can consist of micro-enterprises. The micro-enterprises relatively are more formal as a setup. They work with users and then they share value. But they are formal in a way, but also not in traditional ways in the hierarchy or bureaucracy.
When you're partnering with some of the partners from outside Hire, the food producers or the content producers that go into the recipes, do you have more formal relationships with those? I would expect that maybe those organizations would think, you know, here's Hire, a very formal, large company. We need to have some sort of contracting in place? Or is that different now because you've been able to create this very agile system?
It's not a traditional contract where you have two parties. So it's not in a formal way as we previously did business in. Today, we are working in a more dynamic way. We don't work with just a fixed number of suppliers. Whoever is more capable of fulfilling user needs, they will be able to join our ecosystem. But there are still some formal elements. For example, there are some terms and conditions. After we create the value for the user, how do we share the value and distribute the value amongst the ecosystem partners? There are some formal setup regarding that.
I'm interested also in a word that Bill said, which is resistance. And so I think a lot of what both of you have done is change management. There's a saying that there's no change that comes without some kind of loss. And I wonder if there have been any costs that you've seen along the way that either you've struggled with or that some of the people you've worked with or had to kind of bring along have struggled with, and how you've overcome either those fears or those very real losses. Go ahead, Louise.
Yeah. Certainly, especially I would say with the politicians, we had some difficulties in finding out how best to explain what it was all about and how best to succeed. But within the Copenhagen capacity, very much the same thing, because it's so new, and it was said it's not a value proposition. If we don't have a value proposition, we cannot sell this. We cannot use it as a USP to bring in new companies, for example. So right now, we're still waiting to see if, for example, we're needing some more education within eSports and gaming, specifically made for the industry. That's one of the points that people pointed out. If we were to succeed, it's still a little bit fragile. It's new. So we have to bring new members on board, and of course, when being open and not having a strategy, many people don't like that. It's you need a plan, so it's certain people work very well in that kind of system, and some people find it very difficult, and that's natural. So you just really have to be open about it and talk about it openly.
And is there any kind of loss of kind of autonomy of any of the partners where they, because they're now partnering with somebody else, they need to give up a little bit of the control that they've had? Have you experienced that at all, or is this?
Yes, I'm sure, but I haven't noticed that so much. I think actually people, they want to, but they find it difficult. Yeah. So it really is just communication.
More about the planning. Mm-hmm. Mr. Wu.
So your question is, what is lost? And I think that means that suggests that this is something that you used to own. But we're working in the changing times and changing needs with the users. So I don't think there is really anything lost. What we want to gain is the ability to better fulfill user needs. Those things lost might not be a bad thing. For example, you may have lost power as a leader, but I think as a new leader, the power should be distributed to all entrepreneurs rather than in the hand of only a couple of leaders. So I don't think we've lost something, but we have gained more. In terms of fear, definitely, some people fear change and the uncertainties that changes bring about. But as a company transform, more and more people will become receptive of the changing environments, but some people may be less adaptive and they might not be suitable for this organization.
I think now we'd like to open questions to the floor. I can't see you all very well, so I'm going to rely on the folks with the microphones to bring them to anyone who has a question. I do see a couple hands up. There's one over here.
Hi, thank you. It's directed for Mr. Wu. I'm curious about the change that you're referring to, because I went through a time in which they fired 12,000 managers. How many of those managers ended up being entrepreneur? Do you know that?
That's a great question. Many people think that these people have been fired. But I think very importantly, as a company and organization transforms, it is really a change of roles and positioning, a redefinition of roles rather than being let go or fired. As a bureaucratic organization flattens, middle-level managers are no longer needed. And in this process of transformation, those who are more adaptive to the changes can become entrepreneurs, whereas those less adaptive will leave the organization.
Did you find that those who were able to adapt and become entrepreneurs were able to be successful in the micro enterprises that they created?
Yes, indeed. In the past few years, we have seen that some micro enterprises have become so successful that they have become public, and some others are in the process of becoming public companies. And that, to some extent, shows how people empowered will be able to unleash the potential of their micro enterprises to create value for themselves and also for the users.
Anyone else?
Yes, please. This is also a question to Mr. Yong. Looking into the economics of functioning ecosystem, win-win is the underlying pattern, actually. How would you distribute the revenues between all the players in the ecosystem? Is there a kind of standardized process, or is it a permanently ongoing iterative process, or how would you see that, or what are your experiences on that?
This is a critical question to consider when designing an ecosystem. Our idea, our concept is to create better value for the user. And in the process, we create more value. We add value, and only with added value can we share that among the ecosystem partners. If we're only working in a transactional platform, such as a traditional e-commerce platform, and you don't really create additional value, there's nothing to be shared. It becomes a zero-sum game. For example, the ecosystem the e-commerce platform wants to play a dominant role, and they would like to get a bigger share than everybody else. So we see a disconnection of creation and distribution of value. And we focus on creating additional value. For example, now we have organic farms being part of our Internet of Food ecosystem. And consumers now have direct access to them and to healthy food ingredients. And that addresses one pain point of traditional e-commerce platforms where an organic farm wouldn't actually make much profit because the platform takes all. our ecosystem is focused on creating more value and sharing more value with everyone. And it's also a dynamic process adjusted based on the user satisfaction.
I had a question for Louise. Is video gaming and indeed technology has long been a sector dominated by men. I wonder what you are doing to try to rectify that as you build up this new ecosystem.
It's a good question. We are now looking into that, and right now we are doing a campaign called Women in Tech. So that's one of the parts that we're doing, but also we're looking into how can we help and push that ecosystem to involve more people, and that being especially the women within tech, women within the gaming development, but also very much women within eSports. And I know that the Astralis group, the national team that I was mentioning, they were all Counter-Strike champions. They've now bought different teams, one of them being within the game League of Legends, but it's also within FIFA, the football esport. And here they have just actually hired the first female esports star. So really it's just getting everybody to work along with us and trying to get these focus areas so that we know that the gaming industry, like Unity Technology, they're working with us about this, using their channels, and all the gaming platforms such as Subway Surfers. They have a huge YouTube channel that way we can propose things like that and aim at getting more coders, more women into coding.
Maybe I'm being Pollyannish, but I see enormous sort of shifts in power and as we bring more voices into these ecosystems, seeing ecosystems as a possible way to actually, for the first time, bring in underrepresented voices. Do you see that as kind of a possibility in the other ecosystems you're working in as well?
Yeah. It's really looking, the way I think these emerging new ecosystems are working is that they bring in new members. One of them could be women in tech, or more coders and more esports stars, but it could also, for example, getting all completely other members. As long as they get along, I think if there's too much competition, then it'll weaken the ecosystem. It really gets much stronger if they stay together and focus on doing it all together, basically.
Any other questions out in the audience? I see one here.
吴勇你好，我们是
Hello, Mr. Wu. We have a few dozen Chinese business people participating in today's forum, and we are excited to see Haier being showcased here at the forum. My question is, when we say everybody can become a CEO, this is a noble aspiration, but indeed, in fact, not everyone will be a CEO of their own. So at Haier, how do you determine who can really become a CEO of their own? And if they can't perform very well, what do you do with them? And do you also provide equitable opportunities amongst everyone? Thank you for that question. Drucker said, indeed, we want to have everyone become their own CEO. And I guess the word CEO here should not be defined on a single level or dimension. I think more importantly, what it means is to have everyone be able to self-manage and create value. So I don't think CEO should be taken in a very narrow sense here. At Haier, we have 80,000 employees. We really want to have all of them become an entrepreneur and a CEO of their own. And like you said, we need to create a transparent and open environment for equitable participation. As a company and a platform for entrepreneurship, building an ecosystem, we indeed need to create an open and transparent environment for equal participation where people will be more motivated to participate. And how do we determine, and how does an organization determine the individual's role? I don't think someone has that job to determine others' role. It's really the individual themselves and also the users who will be the determining factor. If the user likes what you produce for them and the solution you develop for them, you are creating value and you are chosen by the user. If you are not chosen by the user, then probably you create less value. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. I feel like we could spend a lot more time talking about these two. I don't even know whether to call them organizations, but ecosystems. So thank you to all the panelists and the presenters.